Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So today I actually have this sketch in my sketchbook already sketched out, but I was not too sure on what I wanted to use in terms of like a coloring medium or what I wanted to do with the sketch in particular. But I was kind of like revisiting some of my sketches from the past, and I don't know if you guys remember this one I did of Ezra Theodore from Reverse 1999. I ended up doing the coloring with the acrylic painting gel pens from Languo. So I thought it'd be fun to do kind of like a reattempt of using these gel pens again, but this time the kind people at Languo actually sent me their 72 color set of acrylic painting pens. I'll talk a little bit about the differences about the two sets a little bit later in this video, but this one is the 72 colored set. It is the plus size tip, so this is considered their bold tips, which is a 1mm width for the tip of these gel pens. So I'm going to go through and show you guys what is inside the box. So we are greeted with all the pens like this, kind of like in 4 separate different trays that are vertically stacked. So here's our first tray, kind of like rainbow colors at this point. Our second tray, so a little bit more of our neutrals, some purples and blacks, and then our third tray with more pinks and earth tones, and then our last one, which has much more vibrant as well as some darker colors for our fourth tray. So here's kind of like a little overview of all the colors laid out together, but I will be doing some color swatches. But first, let's go ahead and take a look at the pen itself. So a nice kind of like plastic clear-ish body. You can kind of see the reservoir of the acrylic gel pen ink inside. The pen tips, or like the pen caps, are actually very tight, which is great. It makes it very airtight and hopefully will prevent them from drying out. This is what the tip looks like right now, as well as just the general body. The caps do fit on the end, so it makes it a little bit easier if you don't want to accidentally lose your pen caps. I was also trying to show you guys how tight the caps are. There is like a nice satisfying click, so you know that your pens are properly capped and kind of like making sure that they're not going to dry out on you. So let's go ahead and open up my sketchbook here. This one I keep a lot of my color swatches for different traditional mediums. So this one is actually the 54 color set version, but we're going to flip on over to our I don't even know how to explain this. I guess a very poorly done chart so that we can do our color swatches. As always, most kind of like pens, markers, traditional mediums have some sort of color swatches on the back just for reference. So I use that to kind of set up my grids for our template for our color swatches. And the colors themselves are very vibrant and very bold, which I really like. The dry time is actually pretty okay, I found, compared to like actually using acrylic paint. I think in general it dries pretty quickly, but these ones dry a little bit faster, probably because it's a thinner layer. But they have pretty good coverage, and like I mentioned, the colors are very bright and bold. They do dry a little bit more on the darker side compared to when you initially lay it down, but I don't think it's like too big of a difference. I also accidentally screwed up my color swatches, so there is like one little area that has like a little blot, which I will end up putting that color at the very bottom because I accidentally missed it when I was labeling all of the colors. So yeah, there's one thing that I actually really like from this particular set compared to the 54 color, and it's kind of like the main difference that I found between the pens, because the general like formula of the paint markers themselves alongside with basically everything else of the pens are exactly the same. This is just a slightly larger set, which in turn you have more colors. And that was kind of like one thing I talked about when first using these gel pens, was the fact that I wanted more darker colors in the set, because the darker colors in a lot of like paint markers or paint pens feel very limited when they give you dark colors to choose from. So luckily in the last tray, which is the kind of like last 18 markers, about half of them give you a good selection of more of those darker colors, which I will utilize in the second drawing that we'll be doing today. So let's focus up on just working on this particular drawing first, and then we'll work on a second one a little bit later. So let's talk about the drawing just in general before I dive back into talking about the gel pens. I ended up having the sketch of Coco from Witch Hat Atelier in my sketchbook, and I was not too sure on what kind of like medium that I wanted to work in. So I ended up sketching with just normal graphite pencil or like a mechanical pencil to start off with instead of like my colored leads. And I found it a little bit easier. It doesn't really have like a waxy surface or anything. So I ended up lightening it up with a kneaded eraser just to remove some of that that darker pigment so that we can just work straight on with the acrylic gel pens. So in general, the gel pens work very much similar to any other type of pen. The only difference is the fact that they're very opaque. So layering up and getting very flat, nice, smooth, even coverage, I think is very easily achievable with these pens. And I do like using the bold kind of like tips a little bit more. There are like finer versions, which initially when I was using these, I wanted to test out the fine tip version to see whether or not I could do maybe smaller drawings and get more details. These ones have a very consistent kind of monoline look in a way. They don't taper all too much unless you do end up like flicking your pen to maybe get a little bit of that tapered end look to your lines. But for the most part, it's very much like one thick line. So it's a little bit of adjusting depending on how you typically like to draw or depending on maybe your style. So when I was coloring Coco and when I was doing the drawing of Ezra from a few weeks ago, a lot of you guys actually suggested that I try blending with my finger. I think a few of you guys have suggested me looking up an artist on YouTube here that do a lot of like shorts of different traditional mediums, sometimes like digital mediums from what I've seen, named Slow.io. I've seen their stuff quite a bit, and I am a follower of theirs, so I do often see a lot of their uses for a lot of traditional mediums, and I do notice that they definitely use these kind of like acrylic gel pens quite a bit. And the way that they blend, and a lot of you guys have suggested me trying to do the same because I was talking about not being able to get like a very good way of blending the pens in a way that I prefer to use them in, I guess. And you guys suggested for me to use my finger to smudge or maybe some sort of tool. And smudging with your finger or probably like a tool as well, it does work to like a certain extent. I'm sure there's like a way you should do it so that you can get more of like a smoother transition between two colors. But I do end up kind of like going back and forth and trying my best to test out whether or not I want to blend with just the pens themselves, which you can definitely do as long as the paint markers are still wet, or trying to do it in a way where you kind of do more like hatching and let the colors kind of like physically blend or bleed into each other in a more like hatching way instead of like having it actually blending of the paint itself, if that makes sense. I'll explain it a little bit more probably when I'm working on the second drawing, because that one I decided to attempt it not doing any physical blending with my finger or a tool, just to make sure that I'm not going to be relying on this too much, which feels a little bit weird. There's nothing wrong with doing it. So even though I always talk about that I love tactility in traditional art versus doing something, I guess, like drawing and illustrating and just all that on digital, I don't really use my fingers all that much for like blending and stuff. I think it's because I was always taught in school or like taught when I'm using different mediums that the oils from your hands is never too great to be using for, let's say, drier mediums. So like graphite, you can accidentally be pushing in the oils and the pigment of your dry medium into the paper, so when you try to lift it or erase it, you're not going to be able to, or it's going to be very difficult because of the oil mixing in and seeping through the paper and basically locking those pigments in, versus using, I guess, like more of like a wet medium like paints, acrylic paints, oil paints, watercolor, and that stuff. I don't typically use my fingers to blend or anything. Oil paints, I would use like a wet rag or a dry rag if we wanted to do like coverage of a larger area. But even like of a acrylic painting, I tried my best to always try to get like smooth surface blending by just using brushes rather than using my fingers, which I know a lot of artists do, like a lot. So just, even though I like tactility, I just never think to use my fingers. I don't know if it's because like I subconsciously also just don't want to get my hands too dirty, accidentally like maybe smearing paint or accidentally leaving marks on the page. But enough about that. Let's talk back about these pens. So one thing that I actually was kind of surprised, so like I mentioned, the difference, or like the main difference, I guess, well, I guess it's the only difference technically, because the pens are the same between both sets, is the fact that the 54 and the 72 do have a fair amount of overlap. If anything, all of the 54 colors from what I witnessed are in the 72 pack, but the 72 pack have an extra 18 colors, which included kind of like fluorescent colors alongside with a selection of much more neutral to dark colors, which I really enjoyed. You'll see me use it a little bit into Coco's kind of like collar area, but for the most part, I kept Coco's illustration or painting much more on the vibrant and light side, and luckily, one of the colors in the final pan of the 72 set was this very vibrant kind of turquoise color, I guess you could say. It's basically the color that I always talk about, this almost like seafoam green, which I always really like, and it was the perfect color to work with for her hat, or her cap, I guess, not a hat, alongside with her uniform. So I ended up using a lot of that color, and I was really glad that this color was included because, like I said, it's a color that I really enjoy. And when we're working on our second drawing, I'm going to be utilizing kind of almost the opposite. So instead of using these very bright, almost lighter to mid-tone colors, I will be using a lot of the darker colors that are going to be more featured, I guess, in the 18 colors that are introduced in the 72 colored set. Now, with that being said, the Languo gel pen sets come in like these large boxes, which are the ones that I've shown you guys today, alongside with like smaller packs. So if there's like a specific color combination or specific type of color group that you're looking for, they do sell these little, I guess, packs of gel pens that are very much centered around different color families rather than a whole set like this. So depending on how you like to work, or maybe if you're looking for refills or wanting to add a very specific color family to your already, let's say the 54 color set or the 72 color set that you already have, you can definitely add it like bit by bit, or pretend like maybe you only want to work with blues and reds. You could definitely do that and buy specifically just the blue and the red kind of like selection as well. Because I do like the fact that they sell kind of like smaller packs so that you don't have to use a full rainbow of colors if that's not something maybe you like to work with, or you already have like a set, you just want to add supplementary colors a little bit later. That's like definitely an option. Because I think in the version where I was drawing Ezra with the 54 colors, I did mention that I was either going to look into another set to potentially get some darker colors as well, because I really wanted colors that kind of bridge in between the colors that was already included in the pack and to bridge it with the black color, because I feel like there are a lot of styles and I feel like a lot of people would like to work with very bold colors alongside with outlining with black. But for me, I do like a little bit of that softer look. So having an additive amount of darker colors that are not quite black, but they're darker than our mid-tone colors helps me at least have a little bit of options in terms of potentially blending colors or sticking to a very specific kind of like color palette so that we can have a little bit more subtlety rather than always using black for our darkest color in this case. But working with the bolder colors are always very fun, or working with like a limited color palette can be fun too. So for colors, let's say for Coco's cap and her kind of like uniform, there wasn't really a good dark tealish color that I would have liked to use for the shadows, but we did have access to like a really nice purple, which was dark enough from the kind of turquoise color, which would provide a good shadow, but it wasn't too dark that it was gonna look super off. And I do like the kind of contrast between like the teal and the purple. I think look really nice. Ended up adding a lot of yellow to bring out the highlights here and there, alongside with, you know, doing a little bit of blending for, let's say, a little bit of the blush in her face, a little bit in her eyes, and I think the shadow underneath her chin. Other than that, I mostly did like hatching or lines or just scribbling kind of motions to do any sort of like shadows or highlights or anything that wants to be a little bit more subtle. For the background, I went with kind of like the sparkles, but I ended up smudging them. I do this often with colored pencils, but I thought it'd be fun to do this with the acrylic paint markers and just making it almost like dry brushing with acrylic markers, except for the brush is my finger and it's not specifically done in the same way. But I tried my best to add it here and there to make sure that the little star or sparkle that she's kind of like holding is kind of glowing through in a very soft way rather than relying on the really thick and opaque paint, I guess. I don't know, I feel like I still do struggle a little bit with working with mediums like this that are very bold, both in color and in kind of like its line width, or kind of the way how it applies to the paper is very different. I feel like it's a little bit hard for me to adjust to this type of medium, only because I definitely prefer something that I can slowly build up. So I'm more used to dry mediums, alongside with the fact that I typically like softer looks or application when it comes to my art, instead of using something that's very bold, which is kind of like a reason why I struggle with a lot of like opaque painting mediums. But I do think the way that I ended up drawing Coco here, I actually really do like how she turned out. But I wanted to do something a little bit more, not ambitious per se, but slightly more detailed. And we're going to work larger alongside with working with a lot more of those darker colors. So this is our first drawing that we're going to be doing today. And then we are going to be moving on to our second drawing very, very soon. But first, I wanted to show a little bit of a comparison. I don't really think there's like improvement. I think I just worked a little bit differently. The one that I ended up doing with Ezra, you can see I did more of that scratchy hatching kind of motion for getting kind of like a transition between my colors. But here we go. Let's work on our second drawing. So in order for me to work a little bit larger than in my sketchbook, I decided to pull out my Strathmore. I think it's the recycled paper. This is about a 9x12, but I'm using it horizontally because I thought I was actually going to be drawing Kaya as well on the right-hand side. But I got a little bit chickened and I decided to just do one drawing at a time. So I will end up only doing this one of Dan Heng PT, or Permancer Terry from Honkai Star Rail, once again, because he's one of my favorite characters to currently draw. So yeah, his color palette was kind of like perfect for me to experiment a little bit with some of the darker colors in the color palette, alongside with using more of that kind of turquoise color that I also love. So to start off, I ended up doing the sketch with the Pilor Color ENO, I believe. I lightened it up very, very lightly, and then we're going ahead and starting off with our base tone, or our main color for the skin. Now, different from how I did Coco, you can kind of see I went back and forth with the pens, alternating a little bit from using the main dark, the main color, which is like the peachy color for the skin, and then this really bright kind of pale beige color that I ended up using for the highlights. So instead of blending with using my finger to basically blur out the colors into one another, I ended up just doing a back and forth, and then doing more of like the scratchy kind of movement, or like a hatching motion, so that we could blend it in a way, but also leaving some gaps so that it just looks a little bit more like it's faded into one another. So another thing that I wanted to test out by switching to a larger sketchbook is the paper type. So the paper that is in my sketchbook that you guys saw earlier where I was drawing Coco has a very smooth but thick kind of like paper. It has barely any texture. It's like super, super smooth, like very smooth, almost cardstock like. But this one is recycled paper, so it does have more of that tooth. Every time I've done like ASMRs of kind of just like me sketching, you can kind of hear the toothiness from it. So I wanted to see whether or not the application of me being able to lay down flat colors was going to be easier or harder. I definitely found that it skips a little bit less on paper that have a little bit of texture or tooth to it. Now, the downside with this paper is the fact that it is very thin, and I think later on in the video I will be showing you guys how much the paper has absorbed, whether or not I had any bleed through or tearing, because that's another thing. With a medium like this, which is like a wet medium, kind of suited more in terms of very much like accessible, like you don't actually have to activate with water or anything, paper type is still going to matter, because applying so many back and forth motions with a wet medium, you can tear your paper, so just have to be a little bit conscious about that. But let's talk about the dark colors, because this is kind of like the main focus and my favorite thing about this set compared to the 54 colors, like I mentioned many times in this video. So Dan Heng's color palette, both his like turtleneck-ish jacket, shirt, whatever you want to call it, is on the darker side. It's pretty much just black and kind of like a dark gray. His hair is also very much just black. So I'm going to take advantage about basically me trying to utilize as many of the darker colors that are in that final tray in the 72 set. So I'm going to be switching from, I think, 5 different colors. and 4 of them being very similar in value, but there's subtlety in terms of the hue and just the color themselves. So for his hair, you can see that, like I mentioned earlier, I was trying my best to blend in a way without using my finger. So I'll be switching between kind of like the skin tone color and then this kind of like dark purple, which I'm using for the majority of the base of Dan Heng's hair. And I'm basically switching between different colors and coloring it in different sections. And if the paint is still wet, I'll try my best to blend. If it isn't, then I'm going to be kind of just marking out section by section to give it more of that hair texture. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, there is an artist named Hyokuri, I believe. I talked about them in the Ezra acrylic marker or acrylic painting gel pen video of kind of like that was kind of my in towards like learning about these pens. They were kind of the first artists that I saw even just like using them in a way that was not for writing or decorating, I guess, if that makes sense. Because you can definitely use these for more like journaling. You can use them on top of like Polaroid pictures, kind of like a glossier surface. You can use them for doodling on top of like, I don't know, your sketchbook, your photos, your documents, I don't know. But basically you can use them not as like an art medium per se. You can definitely use them for just like everyday use, like as a normal gel pen. But for kind of like blending or coloring or doing like almost like a full illustration, I always like Hyokuri's kind of approach to it. They do it kind of like section by section, especially for the hair. And I do like this a little bit more for kind of like 2 reasons. One big reason is the fact that, like any traditional art medium, there's kind of like a finiteness to it where you don't have like an unlimited access to your medium. Let's say pencil crayons, once you are kind of like sharpened all the way down to the final nub, you kind of like run out of that pencil. Then you have to go buy a new one or you have to buy a new set. So these aren't really an exception, right? So I don't want to accidentally color a whole section, let's say with one color. So let's say we're working on Dan Heng's hair not in sections, and I started off with just black. So maybe I fill in the entire silhouette of his hair with black, but then I go over and color over everything with like many other different colors. I feel like, at least for me, I wasted so much black ink. But this could be like a benefit and a downside. So downside is you're running out of, let's say, said medium. But the good point or the good side would be the fact that maybe your surface needed to be primed and it might be easier to paint on top of the already painted surface. So maybe you laying down a base layer might be a good idea. But like I mentioned, for this paper, it accepts the paint very well. So I didn't feel like the need that I wanted to warp the paper too much by oversaturating it with like many layers of different paint, even though it would be protected from the base layer. So instead, we're going to do it by section. And for me, I find it a little bit more fun to work in this way instead. So being able to try my best to pick out different areas where I want like, oh, maybe this I want to have shadows, this area I want lighter. And I was kind of doing like a back and forth between switching from purple to kind of like our dark pale green to the dark blue to our black. So those are the main 4 colors that I ended up switching around for his hair to still give it more of that black hair color feeling for the most part without making it seem too flat. I should probably also say this as well. It's still doable to work in a very similar manner or achieve a very similar look if you want to do, let's say, black hair and you want to add like many different colors in it. I definitely think it's a little bit more difficult if you don't have so many transition colors. You'll be relying on black a lot to make sure that there's contrast and making sure that the hair reads very dark. Because I mentioned earlier that my gripe with the 54 color set is the fact that a lot of marker sets in general have so many bright and vibrant both light and mid-tone colors, and then give you maybe a selection of 3 dark colors, which I've always found it's always black because that's a staple and that makes the most sense. A dark blue and a dark purple, I think it's usually, and if you can, there's almost like a dark brown maybe in that mix. And this one gave me, I think, 2 more dark blues, another dark purple, I think a dark green and a dark gray. I think is what I ended up getting from these extra darker colors, which helped a lot in terms of having more subtle color shifts. Otherwise, I think I would have to do a lot of blending and bleeding and smudging with some of the mid-tone colors to get anything similar to it. And it's going to be a little bit more of like a harder time because for me, like I mentioned, me having like the subtle color shifts in the hair makes it seem very vibrant and less flat. But like I mentioned, if pretend you do have like some of the smaller sets, or if you did buy like more of those individual, very much like curated color palette sets, I guess, having a set that has like the darker colors might be a good complementary set or like a supplementary set to the ones you already have. It's just something that you want to consider maybe if that's something you would like to incorporate into your style, or maybe it's something you feel like was missing from the set like I did for the 54 color. And like I mentioned, you can do a lot with the 54 color, as well as like you can bring in other mediums that you already have. So maybe you own ballpoint pens, maybe you own fine liners. You can definitely use that in conjunction with the acrylic painting gel pens. You don't have to do what I'm doing where you're basically doing the entire illustration with just that medium. Do mixed media, do a mixture of different things, test different papers. I think that's always fun to do. And it's like a good exercise to see what you like to work with for certain mediums, see what surfaces work the best for the mediums that you want to work with, if that makes sense. So at some point, I thought that I got most of the contrast done for the Dan Heng drawing, so I ended up trying to darken up his kind of like chin shadow that's on his neck. So I decided that I was going to add some of the vibrant colors that was, you know, kind of present in his eyes, it's present in his earring, it's present in the highlights of his hair. So I decided to bring that turquoise color back into the shadow of his neck. Then I could bring it into parts of his clothing, but I think it looked too vibrant, so I'm going to try to keep knocking it back by adding some brown, some of that like burgundy color, as well as the initial kind of shading color that I did for the skin, trying to knock it back, but still have a little bit of it present because I don't mind having a little bit of bounce light coming back into where that shadow is on his neck. But then the rest is just basically me going back and forth using the dark blue, dark green, dark purple, then we use black, and kind of like shifting back and forth, trying to fill in the rest of these dark areas for Dan Heng. In general, I had a fun time just working with the pens themselves. I definitely think if I ever want to work with these pens again, I will definitely work on this particular paper. It just accepts the paint marker very, very easily, because even though I know these pens can work wonderfully on glossier surfaces, something that has like a slight bit more tooth definitely works the best. It just allows the gel pen to roll a little bit more easily, I think, and just have very much more like a smoother coverage, even though there's like patchy areas here and there because I'm kind of working quickly and switching between paint markers and stuff, that you might see a little bit of some areas that have white where I might have missed. This does have a little bit of like a slight sheen, like most acrylic painting mediums do, because of that plasticky nature to the paints. So there were some areas that the glare from my lamp was a little bit too strong. But I think overall, I was quite pleased with at least how I ended up doing Dan Heng for this one. So this is kind of like the final look. I forgot to do the outlines on the other horn, but you know, that's okay. And here's kind of like the comparison with Dan Heng and the one that I did of Coco. I think all of them, including the one that I ended up doing of Ezra in the previous session, I struggled with the eyes. I definitely like how I did Dan Heng's eyes a little bit more, and I think it's because I'm not used to having that such thicker tip to work with for some things with much finer details. And here's kind of like what I would consider the bleed through, as well as like a bit of that ghosting from the acrylic pens. So some areas that I kind of really saturated the paper ended up kind of soaking through, but it's not too bad. So I would definitely consider using this paper probably next time if I end up doing another acrylic painting gel pen session. But let me know. Maybe you guys want to see me draw Kaya next, because that's what I was initially going to plan, because I feel like a lot of these darker colors would be very applicable to his hair color as well and his outfit. So it could be fun to do Kaya next time for a different session. So do let me know if that's something you're interested in, and I'll definitely consider it for another future session, probably on this paper. But yeah, I think that's it for today's video. I highly recommend, if you're interested in trying out these acrylic painting gel pens, then do check out the links in the description, or just check out their website and give their pens a try, because I think it's a very neat kind of medium that's like very portable, as well as an artist that maybe doesn't want to carry around some like loose painting mediums around. But thank you again to Languo for sending me the 72 color acrylic painting gel pens for me to test out and try and show you guys today. But I think that's it for today, so I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!